What if your absence says more than anything you ever said while you were still there? Not because they valued you, but because you held together something they didn't know was falling apart. You didn't yell. You didn't slam the door. You just disconnected, quietly. And yet the silence you left behind was louder than anything you could have shouted. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But what no one talks about is what happens when the mirror walks away. Because you weren't just a person in their life. You were the structure their emotions leaned against, the mirror that made them feel whole, even if that reflection was fake. And when you step back, they don't just miss you, they begin to unravel. Not because you broke them, but because you stopped holding together the parts they refused to see. Here's the part they won't say out loud. They never saw you clearly. They saw who they needed you to be. A crutch, a role, a buffer against themselves. And now that you're gone, they're not grieving you. They're grieving the version of themselves that only existed through your presence. But here's what we'll unpack next. Why your silence feels like a betrayal to the very people who never really listened in the first place. People say they're hurt when you walk away, but most of the time, they're not hurt by your absence. They're hurt by what it reveals. You see, when you were there, they didn't have to think about themselves. Your presence was a kind of emotional convenience, a place to unload, to redirect, to project. They didn't love you. They loved the version of themselves they got to be when you were nearby. The calm one, the victim, the savior, the one who always had control. But now, you're gone. And there's no one left to hold up the mask. They tell themselves stories. You abandoned them. You changed. You were ungrateful. But here's what actually happened. You stopped reflecting their illusion. And now they're left staring at a version of themselves they don't recognize. In a silence they can't escape. Most people will spend their entire lives avoiding that mirror. But you became it. And then you vanished. So ask yourself, what does someone see when you take away their favorite place to hide? Because that's when the real collapse begins. And we're only just starting to see what falls apart. At first, they don't feel pain. They feel confusion. Because people don't usually notice when you're carrying the weight until it's suddenly on the floor. They replay old conversations. They scan your silence like it's a crime scene. But what they're really doing is trying to locate the exact moment they lost control of the version of you that kept them comfortable. You changed the pattern, and broken patterns always create chaos. Not just outwardly, emotionally. Now their anxiety has no anchor. Their guilt has no place to land. Their resentment has nowhere to point. So they look inward, but only for a second. Because that space, that reflection, it's terrifying. You were never supposed to leave. You were supposed to absorb, to keep playing the same emotional role quietly, reliably. But now the stage is empty. The script is broken. And the character they were pretending to be? Gone. With you. They don't know what to call this collapse. It's not sadness, not yet. It's not anger, not fully. It's something worse. It's being forced to confront the truth that maybe they didn't really know you at all. And even more unsettling, they're realizing you might have known them better than they ever wanted you to. When people can't understand your silence, they start filling it with stories. Not true stories, but ones that make them feel safe. Some will turn you into a monster, cold, disconnected, selfish. Not because you were, but because it's easier to believe you were cruel than to admit they were dependent. Others will turn you into a saint. Too good for this world, too sensitive, too pure. Not because they suddenly respect you, but because guilt needs a pedestal to hide behind. But none of it is actually about you. It's about survival. Their identity is rebuilding around the void you left. And in that process, facts don't matter. Only comfort does. Carl Jung wrote about this, how we project the disowned parts of ourselves onto others. You weren't just a person in their life. You were a container for their anxiety, for their guilt, for everything they refused to face in themselves. And now that container is gone, they don't know where to put it. So they rewrite the story. You were the villain or the hero, but never just human. Because the truth? That you simply needed space to reclaim yourself isn't satisfying enough. People rarely say, they left because I ignored their needs. They say, they left because they were unstable. Or worse, they left without warning. As if the warning hadn't been written into every quiet moment you gave them that they never bothered to read. In the beginning, they try to hold it together. They distract themselves. They rationalize. They say, I'm fine. They'll come back. But underneath it all, something starts to slip. Because when someone has used your presence as a mask for their own emotional fragility, your absence isn't just quiet, it's a psychological fracture. The mask starts cracking. Old insecurities return. Suddenly, they're unsure of themselves in conversations. They second-guess how they're being perceived. The confidence you helped stabilize? Gone. The version of themselves they maintained in your reflection? Now flickering. They scroll back through messages. They rehearse what they could have said differently. They wonder when the shift happened. But they're not really trying to understand you. They're trying to rescue their image of themselves, the one that could only exist when you were near. Because here's the secret. Some people don't love you. They love the way they feel when they are seen by you. And when you stop looking, they stop existing the way they want to. Jung called this the loss of the persona, the collapse of the social self we construct to feel acceptable. But this collapse, it isn't graceful. It's panicked, desperate, loud in all the ways your presence was quiet. And in that noise, they're not really missing you. They're missing the mask. It's easy to say, I miss you. But what they really mean is, I miss who I got to be when you were here. Think about it. You were their calm when they were spiraling. You were their excuse when they couldn't explain their moods. You were their container for sadness, confusion, guilt. And now, they have to feel those things without you. That's what stings. Not the lack of your voice, not the absence of your check-ins, but the absence of that emotional reflection that helped them avoid meeting their own shadow. They say they're heartbroken, but heartbreak implies love. This is ego death. This is the crumbling of a version of selfhood they only knew how to maintain through your presence. Without you, they're raw, exposed, unedited. And some people, they don't know how to exist without an audience. Even if it's just one quiet soul who sat across from them in emotional silence, carrying more than they ever acknowledged. It's not really that they miss you. It's that now they have to confront the parts of themselves that only you were willing to hold. Absence is a strange thing. To some, it feels like silence. To others, it feels like punishment. But in truth, your absence is a mirror. The kind that doesn't flatter, doesn't soften, doesn't lie. When you were there, they could see themselves through your kindness, your tolerance, your loyalty. They could ignore their patterns because you absorbed them. Their emotional chaos, you made it quiet. Their neglect, you made it bearable. And now, with no one to catch the mess they left behind, they finally see it. Not all at once, not clearly, but enough to feel the sting. That's why your distance feels violent. Not because you said anything harsh, but because you removed the filter. People don't fear being alone. They fear being alone with what they've hidden from themselves. And when you step away, you're not leaving a gap. You're revealing it. They're not angry that you walked away. They're angry that they now have to look at what was always there, but easier to ignore with you around. That's the thing about real absence. It doesn't echo with your voice. It echoes with everything they never dealt with.
When you walk away, you don't just leave. You activate something. Something primal, uncomfortable, necessary. You become the interruption in their story. The moment where the mask slips, the illusions fracture. The truth slips through the cracks they tried to keep sealed. Carl Jung called this confrontation with the unconscious the beginning of individuation, becoming whole, not by adding, but by removing what was false. And that's what you did. You didn't abandon them. You removed yourself from a version of reality where you could no longer shrink to fit. You became the pause, the space, the stillness they didn't ask for, but maybe one day will thank you for. Because here's the truth, some of the most powerful things we ever give others don't look like love, they look like distance. Not as punishment, but as invitation to finally meet the parts of themselves they've always avoided. And if they accept that invitation, then maybe your absence was the most honest presence they've ever known.